You're likely here because you want to invest in AI stocks, but you also know that stock picking is tough. So if 95% of active managers can't beat a benchmark in the long term, then you sitting around in your underwear on a Saturday afternoon trying to pick the right AI stock probably isn't going to work. So you may be thinking about ETFs, which are indeed a great way to diversify, but the question is, which of the 40 AI ETFs out there is best? So when we look at AI ETFs, we need to start with the universe. And what we usually do is go to VettaFi and find out what lists they've put together. So you see here they have an artificial intelligence ETF list. So this contains 40 names. And we look at the criteria to be assigned to this list. They say investing in companies that are building things related to AI. That's very broad. They talk about ETFs with 25% or more exposure. That's pretty low. Could be pretty low potentially, to companies that spend large amounts on AI. Well, relative to what exactly? They talk about ETFs that use AI to select securities. These usually have high expense ratios with no alpha. If they did, then the creators certainly wouldn't be turning them into ETFs. They'd be making money off of them. We don't do black box investment strategies unless it's with Renaissance or Citadel, the people that are actually using AI to generate alpha. So when we look at this list of 40 AI ETFs, we need to whittle it down somehow. Now, the problem here is that you could say, well, AI is going to affect all companies, so I can just invest in the broad market. Exactly. That's one thesis. If every company is an AI company, then no companies are AI companies. And that goes back to the old phrase, once it works, nobody calls it AI anymore. Now, you could make an argument for narrow sector ETFs. For example, you could say, well, semiconductor stocks are a way to play AI, pick and shovel way. Certainly, you could do that. Cloud computing stocks, same thing. These are passive. They're very objective, so you certainly wouldn't want to be paying any sort of high expense ratios just for a tracker ETF. And let's take semiconductors for an example. Not all chip companies are the same. So, Synopsys may be a firm that benefits from whatever chip company happens to be ahead at any given time. But right now, NVIDIA and AMD are certainly two names that you'd probably want to be watching closely because they're actually selling chips that relate to the AI theme. So this assumption that an AI ETF is going to need a subjective selection process is probably merited, and that's going to cost money. So we can expect the expense ratios to be high. Now, based on previous presentations we've done, we know the expense ratio is the single biggest predictor of a fund's performance. Now, what we want to start by doing here is excluding broad sector ETFs masquerading as AI plays. So here's a list of their top 10 based on assets under management, what we call AUM. Top 10 ETFs, these all have above $1 billion in AUM. So if we just look at the first one, you see here that they've launched this back in 2000, which is well before AI became a thing and fell onto everybody's radar. And you see they talk about targeted access to domestic technology stocks used to express a sector view. So this is a classic sector ETF and something that we would exclude. And we go down the list, we find other passive sector-based ETFs. How do we tell that they're sector-based ETFs? Well, we look at the indices. So you see going down the list here, for example, you have Fidelity's MSCI Information Technology ETF. Look at the low expense ratio, 8 basis points. And that tracks the MSCI USA IMI, so that stands for all sizes, information technology, 2550 index, so they're just using weighting caps there. And you go down the list here. I think the only interesting one here would be the iShares Exponential Technologies ETF. So this actually takes a bathroom sink approach. So Morningstar builds this index. You go and take a look at the methodology. They talk about lots of different themes other than just AI. And it has 199 stocks. And look here, it starts to smell a little bit like an ARK ETF, except they're not investing with any sort of conviction. Look at the weightings. So you have a ETF here with around 200 constituents, and it's fairly evenly spread out. So you're not paying them to do much, right? So this would be more like similar to ARK's flagship innovation ETF, and that would make you ask why that wasn't included in this list by VettaFi. You'll have to ask them about that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But when we look at what's left after we exclude those passive sector-based indices or ETFs that are based on them, now we're cooking with gas. So we have some interesting ETFs to look at here, and I've highlighted 3 that we want to examine further. And I would propose now that we set a $500 million AUM cutoff. In other words, your fund ought to have some traction by now. If it doesn't, then you're probably Johnny come lately. The next fund on this list that's not seen here is a $380 million fund that uses a proprietary quantitative AI model. And it's quite funny. This is that fund, Wisdom Tree US AI Enhanced Value Fund. And they talk about this AI model. But look here in the footnotes. It's quite funny. The fund's objective and strategies changed effective January 18th, 2022. And prior to that, it was just a Wisdom Tree US Dividend X Financials Fund. So they added some AI and then rebranded. So before we get into talking about the remaining AI ETFs, I just wanted to talk a little bit about us here at Nanalyze. So we don't chase clout because we've been around long before clout was ever a thing. So for example, our newsletter, free newsletter, has been around since before Patreon was a thing. And we have tens of thousands of subscribers. I know because I see the bill every month. So to provide the value that differentiates us from other instant analysts out there, we have a team of experienced professionals who help make this all possible. And we keep our comments section very clean and tight so that only comments that add value are in there and that we can all benefit as a community, similar to how Discord operates. So when you go into the comments section today to read the comments, which should provide as much value as the video, let us know which of the 7 ETFs that we shortlist you prefer and why. And then while you're there, we're going to put a link to our free newsletter. Please click that and sign up to our newsletter. Thank you very much. That'll help support the site. So let's talk about this next ETF on our list, the SPDR Kensho New Economies Composite ETF. Now, we've been covering AI for a very long time. You can see here, we wrote about this, 7 years ago? Kensho, it was creating stock indices using AI. They were acquired, and then you see that they put out these ETFs. This is a black box method that can only be judged on performance. And over the years, we've come across and even worked with ETF providers that are trying to capture alpha using AI. It's very difficult. And the question here, how long do you give them before assessing performance? A decade? Well, by then, you have to make a decision before then, right? So these things become very difficult. Going back to my comment that any method that generates alpha probably isn't going to be used to a stock pick for an ETF. So the other name here on the list that was dropped, by the way, we dropped that Kensho ETF for that reason. Then you have the NASDAQ Internet ETF, investing in the internet. Well, that's certainly not something that aligns with our strategy of getting exposure to AI. So you see here the bog standard names on the right, so we dropped that. As for further filtering, so we had 9 ETFs in our shortlist. 2 we've dropped, right? Kensho and Invesco. That leaves us with 7 names. 3 of those we've been watching for a long time. So going back, here's a piece we did in 2017 on funds that use AI for stock selection, by the way. It's worth a read. And then we did a piece on 2 ETFs for AI and robotics. And in that, you see we did this Venn diagram. So these are kind of the OGs of AI ETFs. You have bots, robo, and robot, ROBT. What we did here is we simply said, well, what stocks do these 3 providers agree upon, right? So it should be pretty objective, and it isn't, of course. So we should see commonality, similar to what you see in ESG. Nobody can agree on what it should be because they all have wildly different methodologies that mean nothing. So you see here that these 3 providers could only agree upon 18 names, and you look in that article, see what those 18 names are. But robotics seems to be a commonly added name, at least in the past, because AI couldn't stand on its own. Robotics is more mature, so you have quite a few robotics companies out there that could clearly be called robotics that people could agree upon. So the question is, what does this analysis look like today? And interesting note from that piece, it says here, it's worth noting that the one company which is probably benefiting the most from the rush to buy AI hardware like GPUs is way down on the list. It was back in 2018, we were talking about NVIDIA. we had already been invested in NVIDIA for several years by that. So when we look at the 7 names left on our list, right, we have 3 global X ETFs. We have the ARK's elephant in the room, so one of ARK's ETFs made it in here, and then some other AI ETFs. And notice some keywords that are common across these. You see the word robotics. I think our previous piece here covered 2 of these, reviewing 2 autonomous and electric vehicle ETFs. And then you have autonomous and robotics. So these may be considered similar. So we wouldn't expect to see, perhaps, I don't know, we haven't looked, overlap in Global X's family, for example, but what's next? So we can start to consider basic attributes. For example, bigger is better. So when you have a lot more AUM than your competitors, you can lower your fees, and that's generally good. So lower fees, of course, are better in general. So if you have a bigger ETF, it's likely to be able to compete on cost more. And concentration. So I wanted to raise this because if you're going to invest in an AI ETF, you don't want going back to our earlier comment, you don't want to invest in the broader market. You want some experts to go out there and to make some picks with conviction. So that's what concentration shows. So when we look at this list, we might scratch off 2 names. IRBO there at the top, they have what? The top 10 constituents account for 15% of the ETF. And then for ROBT, it's 19%. And they're also low on the list in terms of the AUM, their assets under management. So that would leave us with 5 names. And maybe the next thing to do here would be to make some Venn diagrams with the remaining 5 names. And it would be interesting to see what commonalities they have. What do all these providers agree are AI stocks? So make sure you subscribe, because we're going to take a look at that in a future video. And for those of you that are premium subscribers, you can download our tech stock catalog. It has over 460 tech stocks. Go in there and use the filter there, ETF, and you can filter on the 22 ETFs in our catalog, a number of which we've talked about today, and then see our notes on those. So I'm going to go ahead and leave you with a recent piece that we did on ARK's conviction thesis, where they overlay AI across 4 other technology themes. It's quite interesting. Please make sure to go into the comments section, sign up for our free newsletter, and let us know what you think about the AI ETFs we've talked about today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this today.